Choosing a psychedelic space holder. This is a topic of increasing importance as more people seek to gain access to these powerful tools for personal growth. It's also a subject that is near and dear to my heart, having been a psychedelic space holder for 27 years. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Eric Osborne. I've been doing this work, as I said, for a very long time. My specialty has been high dose psilocybin, particularly in the group context. And so this subject matter is one that I may have a great deal of insight into. And if you hang out with me until the end, you might come to understand why a therapist isn't perhaps the best space holder for your psychedelic experience. All right, so I just want to jump right into it. You may guess that one of the first things that I would speak to is that of paramount importance in choosing a psychedelic space holder is their level of experience with whatever compound you might be working with. Over the years, I have held space for many, many therapists, and many of those individuals who have shared with me that they were psychedelic therapists later informed me that they only worked with MDMA. And I cannot express profoundly enough that MDMA does not relate to psilocybin, LSD, or ayahuasca in any shape, form, or fashion. As a matter of fact, to call oneself a psychedelic therapist who only works with MDMA may be false for advertising at best, if not deception to an extent. Now, when folks would tell me that, I would kind of take it at face value and not openly criticize them. For a long while, I heard this without ever having my own experiences with MDMA, so I could not really speak fully to the subject until I did have some experience with MDMA. And what I can say is that first and foremost, with all of these compounds or plants that someone might be working with, the plant is the guide. The substance, the compound, is the actual facilitator. And MDMA is an excellent facilitator for opening one's heart, for uncovering even trauma and looking at it in a calm, loving, reflective way. Psilocybin is as different as the sun and the moon. There may be some light shared between the two in that they provide healing on deep levels, but the power of psilocybin to shine light on deep wounds is only comparable to ayahuasca. Now, the thing about mushrooms is that they are capable of being consumed at a huge variety of doses. You can, as we already mentioned, microdose, which is subperceptual. You don't even feel the medicine working within you. Or you can take it to the extremes, as the great Kalendi Ai did, and consume 30 or more grams of psilocybin. Now, I am not recommending that. That individual was absolutely a professional. But having administered doses of pretty regularly, 9, 10, 15 grams, I can say that reliably psilocybin will produce a acute experience that is so much more difficult to manage as a space holder than MDMA. So if someone tells you that they have been holding space with MDMA and now they want to do the same for you with psilocybin, I would exercise extreme caution. The relationship with the medicine is paramount. Now, I'm not saying that someone needs to have 1,000 doses or 500 doses themselves. I'm not saying that someone should have administered 100 or more doses to others before they're trustworthy to work with. But if you can't have a conversation with them about their own personal work with the mushroom, particularly at the doses that they might seek to administer to you, then that is a real problem. If they can't share with you some very challenging scenarios that they have helped others and themselves work through, then that is an individual that you should be skeptical of. Now, the reality is there are an exponential number of space holders, of facilitators out there. I get it. I understand how someone has an experience with these sacred medicines and they feel so compelled to administer them to others. However, one or two or even a dozen experiences very seldomly truly qualifies someone else to administer and hold space for you under the influence of particularly a high dose of psilocybin. Now, there's tons of nuance here to discuss as well, because what's a high dose? For some people, a high dose is actually 2 grams. I have seen, um, should I say, I have supported some very challenging experiences for others who were on no more than 2 grams of psilocybin. And for some of you, that may sound like an infinitely small amount. I have supported people who have consumed 10 to 15 grams and have had a very mild experience. The dosage is not nearly as important as we often seem to think it is. And I'll save that for another video, but if that's something that a space holder cannot communicate to you, then that's something to be in question about. And when I'm speaking of a relationship with the mushroom or the compound, this also denotes a relationship with the entire process, not just the period of 6 to 12 hours when you've consumed this substance, but the span of days, weeks, and sometimes months that leads up to and passes the experience into integration. If if you're working with someone who cannot speak to their ongoing long-term practice and relationship with the process, not just the compound, that's something to look out for. All I want to do is keep people safe. There are, because of the ability of effective marketing, even AI at this point, there is a potential, and I've seen this for years, of folks who are not experienced or are inadequately experienced, presenting themselves in a professional manner that convinces the newly initiated that this individual is highly experienced and highly capable of supporting them. It's impossible to convey to you the number of times that I have held space for, again, therapists and even medical doctors who believe that their psychedelic session in the midst of it was completely wrong. This is not what they had read that psilocybin was supposed to be like. Now, I could walk you through hundreds of experiences and encounters with supernatural, even some might say paranormal. I can easily say transpersonal experiences that do not fit into an easy box of psychotherapy. I will reiterate as many times as I need to that I am not anti-therapist. My wife and I are seeing an incredible marriage and family therapist. I have hired a great number of very effective and very psychedelically experienced therapists. And I have seen a huge number of therapists who have seen the outcomes of psychedelic therapy or have read the reports of the outcomes and decide that this is their pathway professionally. And very seldom does it ever actually work out to be that way because the experience is so unpredictable. This is not something where, as it's often portrayed in media, you lay on a couch with eye shades and headphones, and you spend 6 hours in a peaceful reverie watching geometry unfold behind your eyes and are suddenly healed from your depression. Very seldomly is that the case. Moreover, individuals are going to be working through some very challenging material. They're going to have moments where they question their sanity. You may experience an ego death where you truly believe that you are about to die. And physiological symptoms can express that can cause concern even among medically trained. There is an uncanny ability for psilocybin, especially at high doses, to replicate medical emergencies, true medical emergencies. And yet, in every single one of these cases that I have personally experienced through my own consumption or that I have supported others through, it's passed. Not only has the condition passed and rectified itself by the end of the session, but the individual has found profound healing and benefit from that work. So it's really difficult to say what an experienced relationship with psilocybin or any of these other compounds looks like, other than you will know it when you see it. It's not pretty language. It's not citing research. It's lived experience. It's years of lived experience. And that doesn't mean that they're glamorizing the outlandish tales, but that they can speak to a greater number of relatively uneventful experiences. Because if I was to break it down into a percentage of what I've seen over the years and 4,000 doses administered, probably 60% are relatively uneventful. Now, that doesn't mean that it isn't a powerful and even challenging experience, but someone is often laying on the mat or on the ground or wherever they might be, and experiencing some real struggle internally. Occasionally, that struggle manifests itself externally, and individuals may become paranoid, try to flee, or they may feel that, like I said, they're losing their mind or that they're dying. Now, if you're not initiated into this work, then that may sound kind of crazy. Why does anybody do this? That's a question that, to be honest with you, I have asked myself in the midst of an experience more than once. And what you find out is it's the outcome, the aftermath is where the value lies. And that is why we keep returning to this work and to these experiences. The next thing is to consider is, what is the individual's relationship with power? Is this someone who seems to really get off on being in power? Is this someone who has any level of humility? Can they talk to you about their own struggles? Can they talk to you about times when they let go and allowed someone else to be their teacher? Very often within a ceremony, if not every single time, honestly. The people that I support are my teachers. As a space holder, we often get so much out of the work that we do because there is wisdom that comes through the individual. Our process, our understanding of the process, if we are humble, should and can be informed by the individuals with whom we are holding space for. I can't tell you the number of times that spirit, collective consciousness, God, if you want to call it that, has spoken to me through the individuals that I'm holding space for. And I understand if this just sounds, completely out there for someone who, again, is not initiated into this work, but I can only tell you from my experience that it is the case, and that I have had to humble myself because of these communications and information that I've received. Also, I have received feedback over the years of things that I could have done better. Now, admittedly, I'm very good at this work. I've been doing it for a long time. People of, great success, people who are very accomplished in life have come to me specifically because of my history and reputation. It's something that I take pride in, and at the same time, it's something that I know has to be continually in development. I have to be continuing my own personal work, and much of that means being humble in the space and being humbled by the space that I hold. There's a book that I refer to often, especially around this subject, by David Hawkins. It's called Power versus Force. And this plays out in subtle ways in ceremony, but I see it often over the years as I've worked to train other space holders or have been invited to work in ceremony with others. And there is a subtle display of force rather than power. Now, Hawkins describes the two as diametrically opposed. Power is intrinsic. Power never needs to prove itself. Power is, again, like the sun, it just shines. Whereas force is always trying to establish its credibility. Force is always trying to make something happen rather than allowing what needs to happen. And this very often can come across in very subtle ways in a ceremony. I see this when there are excessive rules in the ceremony space, when the space holder or the facilitator seems to um, overindulge in the ceremonial aspect, when they have a large number of requirements. You must stay in this space. You must listen to this playlist. You must accept my interpretation of your experience. You must trust what I'm telling you about how things need to unfold. Well, that's a clear indication that one, the person does not really have ample experience, and that they have a perhaps an unhealthy relationship to power, control, force. For me, the power lies in allowing the process to unfold. I know that in any given scenario, any ceremony, I'm just going to have to do what has to be done. I cannot tell you what that is, but I also know that I'm going to do it. I'm going to stand there through it all, through the process, in my power, and support you or whoever the person might be through their experience. This is a powerful and important subject to consider throughout our lives as parents, as business owners, even as employees, or just as friends within your community. Are you using power or are you using force when you are supporting another individual on their journey? Very often, folks use force with the best intentions, and yet it is never helpful because, as Hawkins very clearly points out, anytime you use force, there will be force used upon you. It's the law of physics. You push, it pushes back. This is why when I'm in the space, no matter what the scenario is, I am doing my absolute very best to just give space to the process to unfold. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't sometimes interventions required. That's very rare, very seldom. But when they are, those interventions are typically subtle themselves. It's amazing how you can redirect a scenario with posture, with the way that you look at someone, the way that we regulate our own nervous systems as space holders. A experienced space holder knows that their nervous system is an incredibly important component in the set and setting of that experience. Now, another element to this relationship with power that I want to speak to that is probably not discussed nearly enough, at least not from my perspective, is that of the space holder's relationship to spirit versus psychology. Now, I love science. I love psychology. I read about human psychology and sociology and how we work. And I know through these many, many, many hundreds of ceremonies that I've held space in that the frameworks that come out of these sciences cannot describe, cannot contain that which is often encountered in these worlds. The only language that truly suffices, or even comes close, is the language of spirit, like language of metaphysics. Because if you do this work long enough, you will find that you have mystical, spiritual, metaphysical, some even say paranormal encounters. That's not a bug, that's a feature. There is a reason why, for thousands of years, cultures who have known these medicines, known these sacred plants, have classified them as portals into a spirit world. You don't have to agree, you don't have to believe it. I've experienced it so much, I don't know how else to describe it. I will be publishing a book within the next few months that hopefully will relate some of these experiences and provide more context for that. Over time, I'll share more stories, and you can look back through some of the other podcasts that I've shared over the years or shows that I've been on and hear some of those accounts. And you may not believe them. You may think that they are completely imaginary. And yet, for the individuals that experience them, that experience is real. So, as a space holder, when someone has an experience that is real to them, I'm going to validate it. I am not going to tell them that it's just some fabrication of their psyche. And I'm also not going to try to convince them that they are being visited by beings from another realm. I want you to have your own interpretation of your experience. And it is important to know that sometimes those experiences go far beyond words and move into territory that is simply metaphysical. Next on the list is safety and ethics, and this is a big one, right? Now, there's a ton of nuance here. It is a conversation that I have frequently. These are ongoing conversations because they generally cannot fit within the scope of a 30-minute podcast or even a 2-hour sit down. They're evolving. They relate differently to different people. Because for me, as I have experienced it over the years, safety within psychedelic space does not mean more boundaries and more walls. It does not mean that a psychiatrist or clinician need be present or even part of the process at all. That does not denote safety. First and foremost, safety comes back to the space holder's relationship with the experience, the process, the medicine, the sacrament, the compound. It relates to the individual's relationship with power, because if they have an obsession with power or misuse power, then you are unsafe. It comes down to an individual's ability to contain their own nervous system within these experiences, because if someone becomes highly unregulated because you're having a powerful experience that they can't comprehend or they feel that they can't contain, well, then you have just become unsafe. It has to do with where the setting is going to be, or where the setting is going to be. It has to do with how they help you prepare for your mindset going in. Being in an extremely private location is paramount for me. Being in a natural location is paramount for me, and I believe this to be a component of safety as well. I could speak to any number of experiences that were held in homes or urban environments that perfectly well-meaning, and yet because of some factor that was unseen, it became unsafe. I've heard stories of so many folks who got dabbling with LSD or psilocybin in an apartment complex because their friends said they have had some experience and can help them, and someone ends up in the street or in the yard getting unwanted attention. And likewise, within the clinical space, you may not hear it a lot, but there are certainly reports of individuals who felt unsafe and overly contained in a clinic and broke out of that environment into the public. That is unsafe. So there are a huge list of considerations when it comes to safety. But what I'm going to keep coming back to throughout this conversation is that you, as the person seeking a space holder, continue to trust your nervous system. Do they help you feel safe in your decision? Do they help you feel safe about how this process will unfold? Do they feel like they are at ease about it, or do they feel like they are uptight? You know, I had a therapist that I hired years ago and regretted it pretty quickly because that individual, after just a few ceremonies, showed themselves to be very easily triggered and become afraid when someone was having a profound, powerful, inexplicable experience. And there were a handful of times where individuals would say to me afterward, you know, I looked over at the therapist during my session and I could tell that she was afraid, and that made me afraid. That is so important to consider. Another very important consideration around safety and ethics is, are there going to be two space holders? I never hold space, even for the closest of friends, without another person present. Now, if it's someone that I know and we have a relationship built, that's not necessarily an ethical guideline as much as it is a safety guideline, because let's just say you're 3 hours into a profound experience and I absolutely have to go to the bathroom. Or even more simple, I have to go and get your water filled, or I have to go and do any number of small things that come up that require me to be out of your presence for even 3 minutes. And 3 minutes is long enough for something to happen that makes the situation unsafe. I never want anybody that I'm holding space for to be unsupervised for a single moment. That is standard for me. It's also standard for me that supervision goes almost until the individual goes to bed. This is another safety consideration. If the person's holding space for you is not with you for several hours leading up to the ceremony, the entire duration of the ceremony, and several hours after the ceremony assay or session, that is a safety concern. It's absolutely uncanny. It's unreal to me the number of times I have heard a person who has been in a psychedelic session tell me that their therapist or support person left them before they were fully out of the altered state. This is absolutely unacceptable. I have heard stories of licensed clinicians, practicing licensed therapists, allowing someone to drive themselves home 2 hours after coming down from the peak of a mushroom experience. It is absolutely unacceptable. It's also important to me that I have someone of the opposite gender there with me as well. So if at all possible, sometimes this doesn't work out to be the case, but mostly it does, I will have a female space holder there with me as well. So 2 space holders for one person. And if you're in a group setting, as those numbers increase, for me, if I have 3 people that I'm holding space for, then 2 is the smallest number of space holders that I can allow. Once we get up to 4 individuals, then we will have 3 space holders. I do everything in my power to have 1.5 participants per space holder in a group setting. This is so important. I'm not going to go into all the details of what that might look like, but if you stay tuned to this content, we'll be talking about it over the forthcoming weeks, months, and hopefully years. Ethically, this is important to have a discussion. They need to be able to talk with you clearly and plainly about their safety protocols, about contraindicators psychologically and pharmaceutically. They need to be able to talk with you about past infractions, mistakes that they have made, because if they pretend like they've never made a mistake ethically, then they're actually unethical themselves, because no one, absolutely no one, is free and clear, myself included. I can tell you plenty of stories over the years of boundaries that I overstepped, or boundaries that I did not maintain well enough. Now, not to the point where someone actually was harmed or there was any kind of impropriety, but where I realized I should have held a firmer boundary there. I should have waited to have that conversation. I should have had that conversation sooner. Do they have a written ethical framework? Now, if you visit the Psanctuary website, you can see our code of ethics there. It lays out in great detail how we as a community manage the challenging, honestly, ethical landscape that we sometimes walk. And even beyond the code of ethics or whatever written frameworks they might provide, I would ask you to really sit with how you experience the boundaries that they hold. Do they feel like they are a grounded, boundaried person, or do they feel like they are completely wide open and anything goes? A sense of humor is important. Being able to laugh at ourselves, being able to take things very seriously when they need to be taken seriously, are all important components of ethical practice. And much of that can be assessed long before the ceremony. You need to be able to spend some time with the person who is holding space for you. It might not be in person. Ideally, it would be. That's why at Psanctuary, we are all about the community. You come in and you understand who it is that's going to be with you in that space long before you get into ceremony. And even if you don't know the individuals specifically, you understand the culture and the broader container. If you choose to work with me privately, this is one of the reasons why I have been so transparent over the years with my mistakes, with the lessons that I have learned, and to just continue to reliably produce content that helps you, the potential experiencer, get to know me, so that when we do meet, you feel like you have a friend, hopefully. You feel like you have someone who you can trust, that you know you've vetted in a certain way. And even still, we may have challenges between us. That's okay. That's an important part of growth, which is another important and valuable ethical factor. Is this someone that can disagree with you? Are they always a yes person? Is this someone that you can disagree with? Do they expect you to fall in line with everything that they say? That's a major red flag, if so, in my book. Now, I got two more bullets that I want to speak to here. One of them is external and one of them is internal to you. The first one is, what does the person that's holding space for you speak to, or how do they seem to relate to the process itself? And I don't just mean the session. I mean, how do they relate to the preparation? How do they relate to the integration? How are they speaking to you about how this process unfolds? Are they sending you to watch Michael Pollan's Netflix series or read his books? Are they telling you to listen to a bunch of trip reports from previous experiencers? If you're brand new to this, that's a red flag. This is your experience. No one else's can compare to it. Sure, you can read some of the research. You can understand to an extent how this process tends to unfold. But after these thousands of doses that I've witnessed and hundreds that I've experienced myself, I can tell you that not one is the same. There may be some similarities and crossovers, but they are never the same. Your experience will be your unique experience. And so the preparation that you do prior to that, well, it's more personal. It's the diet. It's the content that you consume. It's the way that you're relating to your family and friends. It's your exercise habits, your personal growth plan. What are you actually doing consciously that's going to help you prepare for this? Now, again, in our community, that preparation is ongoing. We have a ceremony coming up next weekend, and the participants in it have been part of our community, or at least tangential to it, for a very long time, months at least. And this means that they have been in the process of some way preparing for their experience. Now, there are greater levels of depth at which we can prepare consciously. But once you know that you are going to be participating in a ceremony or a psychedelic session, then your preparation begins immediately. Your mindset starts preparing for that immediately. You've actually been preparing for it your entire life. You just didn't know it. And so if you have someone who is supporting you and they can conscientiously help you prepare, but even more important, help you be aware of your ongoing preparation, how you can prepare yourself. Because ultimately, the responsibility is yours. You're choosing a space holder. You're choosing to go into this work. You cannot blame them once it's all said and done. Now, of course, if someone does something unethical or oversteps, then they need to be held accountable. And at the same time, there are a number of folks who, because they have not prepared themselves adequately, because they have read the popular media, they believe what they've seen on TV about how a psilocybin experience unfolds, rather than talking to people who have extensive experience, then when their experience does not meet the standard that they have set for themselves, they sometimes want to blame the space holder, and that is not fair. It's happened to me, and also know as a space holder, it's part of the territory. So it's important to have that discussion as well. The integration, now this conversation is deserving of a whole series. Integration is, it's not overblown, it's underblown. We hear it talked about a lot. There's so much discussion about integration, and what that ultimately amounts to for most people is talking about your experience, and that is just one component of integration. Integration of your psychedelic work means applying those lessons to your entire life. It means making the changes that you know you need to make. It means staying in community with folks who can help you apply those lessons and make those changes. Integration is not one thing. Integration is an ongoing process of becoming the highest version of yourself possible. And that is what these compounds help us to do with the right preparation, set and setting, and integration. So I'll leave that there for now because it is such a big conversation. Another thing to look out for with an individual as a space holder is whether or not they are hyper focused on the ceremony or the session itself. If that is where they put all importance, then that's a red flag. They should be able to look at this process holistically. They should be able to talk to you about, you know, so many factors that contribute to the process itself. and they should be trusting enough to let the process unfold itself. This shows up in a similar way that I related to the subject of power and force. If an individual is hyper focused uh, on forcefully containing the experience, and this can look like a number of things, but if they bring, a lot of decorations, dare I say, or accoutrements into the space, that is an indicator to me that they don't necessarily trust the process and they want to intervene. This is a part of the conversation around music and playlists in psychedelic space. I am always going to be an advocate for not listening to music during your psychedelic session. That is an artifact of research. That is something that was used as a control variable in research, and it has made its way into common practice because folks think that's how it's done. Here's how I relate to it. If you're going into this work to explore your spirit, to explore your mind, to explore your psyche, and you are overlaying that with music or content that someone else has created, then you're not exploring your psyche, spirit, mind alone. You're exploring it through the filter of someone else's psyche and spirit. Now, if that's something that you choose to do, I'm not here to criticize it, but my desire as a space holder is to always help you get as much out of your experience as possible. And that comes with minimalism. You do not need a fancy altar. You do not need all of the decorations. You do not need a playlist. You don't even need blindfolds. You can just close your eyes if you want to get some darkness and go inside. That's a point of contention for a lot of people. Some folks want to disagree with me on that. That is totally fine. But I can tell a very long story right now of an individual who I worked with not that long ago who came seeking relief from depression and listened to an actual playlist called Psilocybin for Depression playlist that came out of a research university. And after the fact, he said, Eric, I wasted my time. I just wasted all those hours feeling good about the music I listened to and not resolving the issues that were underlying my depression. The process is where it's at. Give yourself over to it. You might sweat. You might writhe. You might laugh. You might just relax and feel. Sorry, a moth. You might relax and feel at great ease. Nobody can tell you. It's just going to happen. Trust the process. Give yourself over to it as much as possible. And when you come out and you're ready to talk about it, be sure that you're with someone who will ask good questions and not tell you what your experience meant. That's a video. I'll make a whole video about that because it is so important. Nobody can tell you what your experience means. Nobody has the right or even the ability to tell you what your experience means. It is yours. And that's what makes this work so sacred. So the last thing I want to speak to in finding a facilitator, a space holder, is your nervous system, how you feel in the presence of that individual. This could be the most life-changing experience. It could be the most important experience of your life, or at least in the top 3, as the research tells us, right? So, who do you want to share that with? Do you want to share that with someone who you feel even the slightest bit of insecurity or sketchiness around? I think not. I think you want to spend that time with someone who you feel good about, who can help you laugh, who can support you while you cry, who can leave you alone to your process, who can just sit with you in the silence, listen to you without thinking of what they're going to say, who can ask powerful and meaningful questions that can help you explore your experience and your own inner world better, not during the experience. You don't know this until it's over, but a lot of times you end up with someone who wants to talk with you, who wants to psychotherapize you through your experience. Leave the person alone. I do not talk to anyone unless they talk to me in these experiences. It is your sacred time. No matter how many times you work with these powerful medicines, it is sacred. Some say it's when they talk to God. And when you're talking to God, I want to leave you alone. I'll share a quick story that I did experience. a while back. This was I was holding space with someone who was highly credentialed, highly credentialed. I invited them in as a space holder. I paid them to be a space holder because of their credentials. They were so highly credentialed. And during a session where we had, I don't know, 15 or so people there, there was an older woman, probably her late 70s. I doubt she, I mean, who knows, she may have had a psilocybin experience after this, but I anticipated it was going to be her only chance to consume psilocybin, especially in this setting. She was laying there. She did opt for blind eye shades because it was middle of the day and we were outside in nature. And so she had eye shades on and she was laying there quiet. And from a distance, I was just watching it all unfold, taking in the beauty of it all, and no matter how many times you hold space in these, you just have to absorb the beauty of it. And as I watched this credentialed researcher and therapist walk over to this elderly woman lying on the ground, I just kind of questioned she's walking straight to this lady. I didn't see necessarily anything was a problem, but as soon as she got right beside the elderly lady, she sat down, or she kneeled down, tapped her on her shoulder, and I saw the woman take off her blind shades in a very startled way and look up and just kind of like shake her head and nod, and then put her eye shades back on and go back in. And the researcher, this therapist, got up and smiled and walked on about her business. And after it was over, I was talking to the elderly woman, and was asking her how her experience was, and she said, "Well, Eric, it was great. I was talking to God." So I thought, "Yeah." She said, "Yeah, I was actually in conversation with God until so and so came over and tapped me on my shoulder and took me out of it to ask me if I was okay." I'm going to save the expletives because I'm trying to not do that on this podcast as I have in the past. If you want that content, you can go listen to the old shows. But what the actual heck? Someone is laying on the ground on their mat, peacefully under a tree, nothing to be seen, nothing to do other than send them love. And out of their own ego, out of their own relationship to power, this individual asked them if they're okay when they are obviously okay, and just interrupted what was perhaps the most important experience of their lives. That is when I learned that credentials do not matter nearly as much as soul, as spirit in this work, as attention to the small details, as much as caring for the individuals that you're there to support. I hope you've enjoyed this. I will not continue on because I've gone longer than usual, but I felt like a really important topic that I wanted to speak to. Thank you for joining me. If you're interested in working with me, I am taking private clients. That is at ericosborne.com. It is not cheap to work with me. I am pretty in-depth in this work and highly experienced, and it is the most meaningful and important work for me. And if you'd like to work with myself or within the capacity of our community in a much more accessible, affordable manner, then you can check out Psanctuary.org. That's Sanctuary with a P. I really appreciate your time with me here. Please do feel free to like, comment, subscribe, share, do all those things to help to boost this algorithm so more people can have a more holistic conversation about what it means or what's the important considerations when choosing a psychedelic space holder. Thank you.